I think the first thing we need to admit is that the war in Iraq is a mistake. It has placed our country in great jeopardy. It has placed our country also at odds with its moral standing in the world. We have become complicit in crimes against humanity, torture, war crimes, and crimes against the peace. How do we end that? By getting our troops out of Iraq now. That means that we request of the generals that they put together a plan for the orderly withdrawal of all troops from Iraq. And then we'll only start with Iraq. We'll finish up with Afghanistan and the more than 100 other countries in which U.S. troops are stationed. First of all, I have to say that I support the establishment of a Department of Peace, and I believe that the United States Department of State is appropriately situated to become the United States Department of Peace. And why is that important? It's important because we need to send a message to the world that there has been indeed a fundamental shift in the policies and the priorities of our country, that we are now going to be a force for good in the world and that we're going to be a force for peace. Secondly, after the establishment of the Department of Peace, it is also necessary that we draw the line. There will be no more weapons transfers, particularly to countries that have dubious or questionable human rights records. But we don't need to transfer weapons of mass destruction. Conventional weapons are weapons of mass destruction. We can transfer books and teachers and education and farming technology. We can transfer scientific technology. We can transfer so many things that will help people. We don't have to transfer bombs. Food, not famine. Books, not bombs. Human needs, not corporate greed. I think it's very clear that there's very little room for those of us who favor impeachment inside the Democratic Party. There's very little room for those of us who want to bring our troops home now inside the Democratic Party. There's very little room for those of us who want to protect civil liberties in this country and to roll back the Patriot Act, the Secret Evidence Act, the Military Commissions Act, all of the pieces of legislation that are an affront to our Bill of Rights. There's very little room for us inside the Democratic Party. I am pleased and proud to have found my political home with the Green Party. What I would say is that we have all seen the constraints of the Democratic Party. And so to the extent that those constraints are at variance and at odds with our own values, then we must look to other countries, and other voters in other countries who have voted their values, and what did they get? If we look at the people in Venezuela who voted their values and not their fears, they got Hugo Chavez. They got a chance for real freedom, for real self-determination. If we look at the people in Bolivia who for the first time have voted their fears and have an indigenous leader as their head of state, they didn't vote their fears, they voted their values, and look what they got. If we look at people in Nicaragua who had the opportunity to turn the clock back or to move forward with Daniel Ortega, they chose to move forward and vote their hopes and their dreams and their aspirations for the country of Nicaragua. And so now we have Daniel Ortega as the president of Nicaragua. I would suggest to the American people that we look to our friends who have voted their hopes and their dreams and their aspirations. Let's not vote our fears. Let's vote our values. I would say that Dennis is my friend. Dennis Kucinich is my friend. And unfortunately, he's under a similar attack. Of course, our issues were very different. But in the end, there was one issue in which we had in common, and that was the issue of being able to become an independent thinker within the confines of the Democratic Party. Can the Democratic Party allow independent thinkers to operate freely within the party? What the answer is, we've seen from Mike Gravel, we've seen from Dennis's own experience now as he's under attack, and unfortunately, we've seen it with me. I think it's very interesting for us to look at the use of the word spoiler, because quite frankly, the connotation that's associated with who a spoiler is in a presidential election context or in an election context bears very little resemblance to the reality. If we're talking about 2000, the presidential election of 2000, it's clear that one thing happened, and that is that folks in highfalutin places got together and decided that they were going to depress the black vote, which was going to be a vote 90% for the Democratic candidate. And in the battleground state of Florida, that happened through illegal means. And unfortunately, no one in the state of Florida was held accountable, and no one was held accountable by the Democratic Party, which received those votes. In addition to that, there's also the idea that that has not been explored of how exactly do we come to this result of George W. Bush having won the presidential election because he won Florida by 537 votes. How can you have such a victory by such a slim margin when 6 million votes were not counted? 1 million black people went to the polls in 2000. They voted. They were able to get to the polls to vote, and their votes weren't counted. 1 million black people went to the polls and voted in the presidential election of 2000. Their votes were not counted. 5 million non-black people went to the polls and voted in 2000. Their votes were not counted. How in the world can anyone say that George Bush won the election by 537 votes when you've got 6 million votes uncounted? Well, first of all, the Democratic majority has failed also in addition to its failure to roll back the intrusions into our civil liberties. They also have failed to repeal the Bush tax cuts, which give an inordinate share of the national income to the wealthiest people in the country, and who are also among the wealthiest people on the planet. So first of all, we could probably get about $100 billion if we just were to roll back the Bush tax cuts on the top 1%. Just imagine what we could do with $100 billion. If we were to roll back the entire Bush tax cuts, we could probably reap about $300 billion. That's not chump change anymore. That is money that can consist of a down payment on trying to move into balancing our budget, or that could go to the programs, the social programs that help people in distress. What we've also seen, unfortunately, is the most massive loss of wealth experienced in the history of the United States by African Americans. African Americans in the subprime mortgage crisis have lost about $92 billion. The Latino community has lost about $98 billion. Now, it's not just the loss of dollars that's important. It's the pain and suffering that's being visited to communities. Now, why is that? It's not the fault of the people who were told that in order to build wealth, the best mechanism for wealth building is home ownership. And so they put their hard-earned dollars together and they purchased homes. And those homes represented all of their dreams about what they could do to build wealth, to pass that wealth down to their children. And now that's being taken away from them. And why is it being taken away from them? Not because they had a dream, but because other folks had a scheme. Other folks had a scheme to charge the highest rates in order to help or try and help people achieve the dream. And so we've got banks that have done extremely well. We've got the CEOs of these banks who make upwards of $20 million. And no one's asking them to tighten their belt. No one's asking them to do anything but, and in fact, most of their money then gets put in tax havens, and they don't even pay their fair share in taxes. And if we're talking about Social Security, of course, we know that Social Security taxes don't even cover the entire $22 million or so of these people who have these huge incomes. One of the things that I think we have to do is to extend the Social Security taxes that are paid all the way up the line of income that is earned by particularly those who are in the $1 million and multi-million dollar income range. One of the things that I think it's important for us to certainly pay attention to is the impact on jobs of the free trade pacts, is the impact on jobs of the free trade pacts that have been passed into law now, CAFTA, NAFTA, AFTA, well, worse after CAFTA and NAFTA. If we even look at my own experience in the state of my birth, in the state of Georgia, where we had women who were able to sustain families really on the income that they earned in the textile mills, the cut and sew factories that dotted the rural south of Georgia. But after the passage of NAFTA, what we saw was those factories shut down and then moved overseas. That's why I introduced legislation to take the tax break away from corporations that would dare to move manufacturing jobs overseas or any jobs overseas. And of course, that was a bit of legislation that I introduced and sponsored, but unfortunately, we didn't get it passed. And so corporations get a tax break. It's a part of the corporate welfare. That's another thing. How many millions of dollars could be saved if we just closed the corporate welfare loopholes? Well, certainly we have a responsibility to protect the right to organize of people in the workplace. It is clear that corporations have no compunctions of doing whatever it takes in order to increase their profit level. And at the same time, we are clear also that government is deficient in curtailing the behavior of corporations when it comes to respect for human rights, respect for environmental rights, respect for labor rights. I can envision green jobs, green manufacturing opportunities for the manufacture of green technologies here in the United States, utilizing existing technologies in the rest of the world. It is clear that the United States has a long way to go in greening itself. It's a process that can be started immediately. It would be wonderful if we could have a solar panel on everyone's roof. And, you know, maybe we also could have a little wind energy creation. We could have a little hydro, depending on where we live. We could have a little geothermal. I have actually visited communities where there's no cars. People don't need them. They chose a lifestyle that was environment friendly, that was carbon neutral, that was carbon free. And I have seen communities that are in the deepest, coldest months of the winter and yet have no heating costs. That's like revolution. The idea that the United States military command would establish an Africa division to be called AFRICOM is outrageous in my estimation. The last thing Africa needs is more weapons of war and destruction visited upon it. Africa needs the constructive engagement of everyone who cares about uplifting people and leaving them for their own self-determination. That, unfortunately, has not been has not been the practice in the past because people were interested in what the human labor was that was available coming from the African continent. Then with the advent of the use of natural resources of the continent, then of course the trafficking moved from human beings to natural resources. Today, I'm involved in litigation to help bring U.S. corporations and Western corporations to justice who have aided and abetted in the commission of war crimes and crimes against humanity in pursuit, reckless pursuit of access to resources. Had I been sworn in after the tremendous mandate from the American people as the Speaker of the House, the first order of business would have been to schedule repeal of the Bush tax cuts, repeal of the Patriot Act, legislation to end the funding of the war, repeal of the Secret Evidence Act, repeal of the Military Commissions Act. I would have made sure that the American people were told the truth about rendition. I also would have made sure that the American people were told the truth about the role of torture in the prosecution of the war on terror. I would also have impaneled immediately a 911 commission of international stature so the American people could be told the truth about what happened on September 11th. On day one, additionally, I would move to rename the Department of State as the Department of Peace. I would submit a budget to Congress that places human needs before special interest greed. In fact, we would have some very special laws regarding the treatment of lobbyists and the role that they play in not only the introduction of legislation, but also its passage. I think the solution is very clear. The United States spends the most in the world for health care. We don't get what we pay for in health care. Somebody is taking it. That money is leaking out, and the result is that we're worse than 40th in the world for life expectancy and infant mortality. We are behind the European community, France, Italy, the United Kingdom, Canada, on the statistics that inform us as to the quality of health and the quality of health care that our people receive. It is clear that we need universal, single-payer system of health care in this country that provides equal service to all. And unfortunately also, we have health disparities. Dr. David Satcher, the former Surgeon General of the United States, recently completed a study that found that over 80,000 blacks died for no other reason than that they were black. It was not a question of access to health insurance. The people had health insurance. It was not a question of access to health care because the people had health care, but it was the quality of care. And so we have got to eliminate the disparities in the care that are given to people because of their race or their ethnicity or because of class. I believe in a single-payer, universal access healthcare system for the United States. I am actively searching for suggestions as to a running mate and members of the cabinet, because with an election, one never knows what the outcome of an election will be. One never knows what the voters will do on election day. And of course, the election of 2008 is so unpredictable and so volatile that anything could happen. Yes, anything, including me ending up at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Now, wouldn't that be wonderful for people who are independent thinkers and who have shared values of peace and justice at home and abroad? If you have an idea about who my running mate should be, if you have an idea about who should serve in the cabinet, please go to our website, runcynthiarun.org, and let us know. In a recent op-ed entitled The Next Step, Ralph Nader named a lot of people who have taken the important step of drawing attention to our country's woes. He encouraged them to take the next step. Well, I've taken the next step. I left the Democratic Party. I joined the Green Party. And can you believe it? Now I'm running for President of the United States. I'm trying to gain the nomination of the Green Party for President of the United States. I have taken the next step, and I encourage you to take the next step too.